Hello, boys and girls. It's Mrs. Stathis, part 2 of Turn on the Light, Thomas Edison. Al's curiosity got him into trouble. One day, when Al was 2, he visited his sister, Marion. She was married and lived on a farm outside Milan. Al wandered into the barn to see what he could see. He watched a hen sitting on her nest and was amazed when chicks hatched from her eggs. Al had an idea. He would experiment and would make goose eggs hatch. Al gathered goose eggs and put them in a nest. Then he sat on the nest. Al sat and sat. Nothing happened. Al heard someone shouting, "Little Al, where are you?" Suddenly, the barn door flew open. Marion's husband, Homer, rushed in. Homer saw Al sitting on the nest. He laughed. "Did you fall in and make a nice omelet?" Homer asked. "I didn't fall in," answered Al. "I thought I could make little gooses come out of goose eggs if I sat on them. If the hens and geese can do it, why can't I?" "Wait until your sister sees the seat of your pants," Homer exclaimed. Marion hugged Al instead of spanking him. She said, "Al, you did a very smart thing, even if it didn't work. If no one ever tried anything, no one would ever learn anything. Maybe someday you'll try something that will work." Another time, when he was about 5 years old, Al climbed to the top of a grain elevator. He slipped and fell, and down he tumbled into the slippery grain. Al struggled. He did not want to smother in the grain. Fortunately, a worker rescued Al. Mr. Edison spanked Al that night. Al took his punishment, but he did not stop being curious. That same year, Al was in the barn. He wanted to see how fire burned, so he lit a small fire. But the fire quickly grew bigger and bigger. Soon the barn was burning. When the fire was out, Mr. Edison marched Al to the town square. No spanking at home. This time Al was punished in public. But even this punishment did not end Al's curiosity. Later that year, Al tried another experiment. He knew birds ate worms. He knew birds could fly. So he mashed worms into water. He talked a neighbor girl into drinking the mixture so she could fly too. The girl got sick. Al was punished. When Al was puzzled and thinking hard, he tugged on his right eyebrow. He had this habit all his life. There's the girl. Milan was changing. A railroad had been built nearby, but not to Milan. Farmers shipped their products on trains instead of ships. Business in Milan slowed down so much that Samuel Edison decided it was time to move. When Al was 7 years old, the Edisons packed their belongings and moved to Port Huron, Michigan. Al was excited. A new town meant new adventures and new experiences. A wagon took the Edisons to the train station. Al was thrilled to be speeding along at 20 miles an hour on the train. He enjoyed the 50-mile ride aboard the steamship Ruby. The Ruby carried the Edisons from Detroit up the St. Clair River to Port Huron. Port Huron was a growing town. New stores were being built, and the sandy streets were being paved with cobblestones. Saws whirled at the sawmills. Al's new home was surrounded by 10 acres of woods where he could roam. But before Al explored his new world, he got very sick with scarlet fever. His parents worried that Al might not live. His mother tenderly nursed Al. He rested, listened to his mother read, and practiced drawing as he recovered. His fight with scarlet fever damaged Al's hearing. Mr. Edison ran a lumber and grain business. One day he had an idea. He would build a tall tower. People would pay to climb it and enjoy the view. Mr. Edison's tower stood 100 feet tall. Al stood at the bottom and collected 25 cents from each visitor. Al and his mother also climbed the tower to read, talk, and gaze at the world. One day when he was 8 years old, Al found a bumblebee nest. He was curious to know what the inside of the nest looked like. Suddenly, Al was hit from behind and knocked down. He looked back. An angry ram had his head down, ready to butt Al again. Al scrambled over a fence just as the ram charged. Al's mother treated his many cuts and bruises. That same year, his parents decided that their curious son was ready for school. They hoped that in school, Al would learn self-control as well as reading, writing, and arithmetic. Al's schooling. Al went to a school that had one room. The students ranged in age from 5 to 21 years old. Al did not like school. He had to memorize dates and math facts. Al would rather ask questions than memorize things. Al's teacher did not like Al's constant questions. He did not like Al taking naps in class or drawing pictures when he was bored. One day his teacher lost his patience with Al. Al heard him tell someone he thought Al was addled. Addled means mixed up in the head. The teacher said Al should not be in school. Later in his life, Thomas Edison said, "I was so hurt by this last straw that I burst out crying and went home and told my mother about it." Mrs. Edison disagreed with the teacher. Angrily, she marched to the school and told the teacher that he didn't know what he was talking about. She added that Al had more brains than the teacher. Mrs. Edison said she would teach Al at home. Thomas Edison's time in school lasted only 3 months. Mrs. Edison was an excellent teacher. She did not want Al's mind cluttered with facts, so she did not make him memorize things. She read books to him. They talked about nature. They climbed Edison's tower. Mrs. Edison answered Al's questions as best she could. When she didn't know the answer, they looked in a book. Al became an eager reader. He rarely went anywhere without a book tucked in his pocket. Al learned so much at home that by the time he would have been in 4th grade, he was reading college books. Al's favorite book was about science experiments. Al also enjoyed the Dictionary of Science, another book filled with experiments. Carefully following directions, Al built a machine to make electricity from friction. His second experiment made electricity from a magnet. Thomas Edison was fascinated with electricity the rest of his life. Al experimented in his room. He collected metal, wire, jars, and bottles. With his allowance, he bought chemicals, batteries, beeswax, and magnets. His mother gave him flour, sugar, and salt. Al mixed different ingredients together. His experiments bubbled. They smelled. They leaked onto the carpet. They exploded. Finally, Mrs. Edison lost patience with the mess in Al's bedroom. She ordered the experiments to end. Al had an idea. If he cleaned up the basement, could he have a corner for his laboratory? He begged his mother. Mrs. Edison reluctantly agreed, but only if Al put a lock on the door. Al was 10 years old when he moved his lab to the basement. Al experimented in his lab day and night. He missed meals. He no longer climbed the tower. He missed sleep. Al discovered he didn't need as much sleep as other people. He could take a quick nap and be refreshed. Mr. Edison wanted Al to read something other than chemistry books. He offered Al money for each book he read that wasn't about experiments. Al needed the money to buy supplies, so he read late into the night. With the pennies he earned, Al bought more chemicals. When he was 11 years old, Al tried another flying experiment. He knew gas made balloons soar into the sky. He would make a gas that would make a person fly. Al mixed a special powder with some water. He did not want to try it himself, so Al talked his friend Michael Oates into trying it. Michael asked how he would get back down if he started to fly. Al told him to grab a tree branch. Al would get a ladder to help Michael down. Michael was not sure, but Al was his best friend. Michael drank it. He flapped his arms. He fell down with a horrible stomachache. Al was switched by his mother. Mrs. Edison was upset about the strange smells coming from Al's lab. She told him that he couldn't have a lab anymore. Al begged and begged. Again, his mother gave in. Al was not to do dangerous experiments. He must label his 200 jars of chemicals so nobody could get sick. Al did as he was told. He knew what was in every jar, so Al wrote poison on each one. He decorated them with skulls and crossbones just to make sure. In 1996, scientists digging in the basement of the Edison house found jars and bottles left over from Al's laboratory. And I'll stop there. We'll finish up the story tomorrow. Thank you, boys and girls.